Can you remember where you were a year ago today? I can. I was in one of the most beautiful places in the world. I was in Floripa, Brazil, for the Interaction South America conference. While everyone was getting jealous of my Facebook and Instagram posts, I was having one of the darkest times in my career. 2 weeks earlier, I was back in London, and I was consulting for a bank. My client had been going for a review by an external consultancy, beginning with the letter M. I'd come up with a strategy for the work ahead, but it was provocative. I'd sent some materials in advance as requested, as I only had 20 minutes to present and get the response I needed to proceed. As I was psyching myself up to the session, my time slot kept slipping. I finally entered the Cisco telepresence room with just my immediate client on my side and several key stakeholders on the other side of Europe. "Can you keep it quick? We haven't got much time," barked the sponsor on the other side of the telepresence. "How much time have you got?" I asked. "Did you read the materials I sent in advance?" Silence. "Just assume we haven't read it and keep it quick." So my posture changed. I realized I had to keep it super tight, super clear, and limit questions until the end. I delivered it as best as I could, as clearly as I could, but they didn't like the message. We didn't have time to properly discuss it, and I left the room without the conclusions I needed. The next day, I was going to a conference, and I was watching a talk by Julia Whitney. She was talking about vulnerability. At the end of her talk, I got a ping in my pocket, and I opened the worst email I've ever received. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. These words were so powerful to me, so damaging. They were anti-everything I stood for, everything that I invest my time and my energy to get better at. So in the break, I approached Julia. I told her I needed some help, and she became my coach. The coaching process started with some self-reflection because I felt there was a disconnect between how I thought I was coming across and what my client had experienced. I needed to look at who I was and what I wanted to be. And it needed to be beyond my resume and all the many titles I use to try and describe what I do. I need to look at my personal self, my career self, and my contributions to the community. For example, there was a lot of things going on in my life with my wife and my kids. I've had a lot of pent-up frustration over the years being an outsider, and also not having enough time to do the things that I really enjoyed in my life outside of work. In my work life, in my career, I've been everything from a designer, a leader, a strategist, to a consultant. And in the community, like you, I had an important connection. I'd been an attendee and a reader, and I became a speaker and a leader through my work with the IXDA. One of the first exercises Julia got me to do was map a timeline of my career, mapping the emotional highs, emotional lows throughout that. As you can see, it's pretty erratic. Even the times when I was very, very happy, I was also incredibly depressed. It was really odd. I decided to do this on the plane to Brazil, but it was quite illuminating for me. She also gave me some tools, a little base blank template, a radial chart template, where I'd define some categories what to do with my work life and my personal life, and map how well I felt about my happiness in each of those areas. Now, I'm a perfectionist, so I rate myself pretty low on lots of different areas, it would seem. But I still learned things about what I got motivated by from that. With these tools and Julia's help, I learned to focus on what was important to me. And I laid out a bit of a strategic outline that described the key outcomes and the principles around how I wanted to come across in my work and in my personal life. Now, I never thought I'd be quoting Michael Jackson, but most designers want to make the world a better place. But it's them that kind of is in the way of that a lot of the time. I think that they need to spend some time looking back at themselves and thinking about what they can change about themselves to help with that and project a future place to change the world in that way. So here we are in 2018. Part of the career plan that I had been developing with Julia was to build on some of the older work that I've been reviving, to help the design community, to help profile others, and help see themselves better. And this is against a backdrop of challenges for an industry in its heyday. We've got an increasing demand for our services, but with that comes a greater degree of hubris around what design and designers can do, and an increasing confusion around the many titles, methods, skills that we're expected to learn and to practice day to day. Hiring gets ever harder, and retaining staff even harder still. And with technology changes as frequently as it does, we often get distracted by the wrong things. So when it comes to profiling people and thinking about careers, people often develop spreadsheets like this. Now, I'm a fan of a spreadsheet. I know some of you are. But from my experiences of using them with people and speaking with my peers, they can take an awful long time to create the spreadsheets for profiles across an organization. They become really difficult to update. And they have this illusion of exhaustiveness that doesn't cover the diversity within a team. And more importantly, they're not very designerly. They're really hard to engage with as a designer. People switch off a lot of the time with these tools. Now, I say this from a bit of experience working with hundreds of designers over my career in London, interviewing many and reviewing various CVs and resumes and portfolios. So I have some experience, but it's largely London-focused. So I appreciate that it might not necessarily translate. But what I've learned is that, we're all different, right? Like humans, we're all different. But designers in particular have a wide variety of skills and techniques and characteristics that are very, very unique to them. They're like snowflakes, not just because of their uniqueness, but because of their fragility as well. This is Samin's business card on the back. What he does when he meets people, he blacks out certain areas so he can kind of tailor it to the people he speaks to, because otherwise it would be rather confusing. Now, you're probably all familiar with T-shaped model designers, the idea of breadth in a lot of different skill areas and depth in one, or even Jared Spool's popularization of broken comb models where there's multiple skills and multiple depths. Or even models like this, where designers can be plotted on a scale from research to graphic design. Now, I think that all of these models can help decode and help see ourselves differently and help map teams and individuals. None of them are perfect, but they can help you see yourself in a different light. So I've been taking this as an input into running my own workshops, using various tools inspired by my own work in this area and my renewed focus from my coaching. So I had 3 hypotheses that I wanted to test. I believed I could use visual frameworks to engage designers in self-reflection, to help guide their future development, number 1. Number 2, gather data to develop more robust industry-wide models that could be put back into the community. And thirdly, develop stronger bespoke competency models and frameworks for organizations and tailor to them, because I found that the universal models don't necessarily work. And I've tried this through various workshops at conferences around the world, running corporate workshops within an organization to get those bespoke viewpoints. And also when I haven't been able to get to particular places and people have got in touch finding out about my work, I've helped guide other leaders across the world to run workshops for their teams. And I'm just going to take you through a little bit about the process that we go through. It's very, very simple. First of all, we just map a bunch of different tools, get people to map themselves a different set of frameworks. And this primes them, it helps us to gather some initial data, and it helps to get people to start looking at themselves differently. And then we get them to create their own models, identify the categories that are most relevant to them, and where they want to develop and grow. And then you can do further analysis, or you can do some work to kind of align development needs and development mentors across the organization. So I'm just going to do a bit of a whistle-stop tour of some of the frameworks I use. We could debate these for months, right? We often do. Please don't today. First up, the career timeline. So in a similar way to what Julia got me to do, I ask a similar question, map your emotional highs and lows, but also map your level of seniority over time. You see this interesting pattern as you get more senior like me, it gets really, really erratic, not just me. Blob mapping. This has been a favorite for many, many years. It actually builds on some work from Adaptive Path, actually. Probably Peter Merholtz created it initially. But some of my colleagues from LBI used it, and we started mapping individuals against these different categories, drawing shapes, and then identifying like where people could grow within these different areas. And it didn't really matter like how big or small these things were. The important thing was the conversation around it. Do it quickly, explain your thinking, have a discussion. And I used to use this in interviews to see if there was any blind spots in what people were presenting to me, and I could dig deeper around it. I extended the model and included more sort of visual design and creative practices as well, because I was starting to manage more of those types of individuals, not just the purer UX ones over time. A few years ago, I was approached by Vitamin T, a recruitment company, and they wanted to build on my previous work, develop what they call a UX spectrum. And we ended up coming up with a very simple online tool which you can check out yourself very quickly, just do it on your mobile or on a desktop and download a PDF, and across different areas. Now, I was not really happy with reducing the visual design down to one segment because of my previous work working with those types of people. And also, we didn't have service design in there. Instead, we had product strategy and customer experience, and there were aspects of that combined could be considered service design. But it was useful in terms of trying to use this type of framework to kind of identify for people looking to hire what types of skills might be more important in particular areas against different titles. So whether you're a service designer or a UI/UX designer, what's the difference between that and a product designer from what we're seeing in the market? One of the exercises we do is a little bit odd. It's a bit unnatural and it's very difficult, and I get mixed responses and lots of challenge around the semantic accuracy of all of this stuff. And I just go, look, just get over that. It's going to be useful. You're probably familiar with the UX versus UI memes. I used to ask similar questions in interviews. Are you more UX versus UI? In a similar way to the blob mapping thing, we would basically trying to understand, I could understand whether someone had shown a bunch of user interface work, but they said they'd done more user experience, so we could dig deeper into that in conversation if it wasn't in their portfolio. So I created some more false dichotomies, and people would map themselves using brackets to kind of illustrate the range of where they work, and a dot for their center of gravity for where they felt strongest. And it really was difficult because people were having debates in their head about are they more product or service or pictures or whatever, or are they more structure versus flow, something that translates differently for different cultures. Soft spread. So I ask a question in the session, which is, what are the most important qualities of a modern-day designer? And nearly always, I get this type of view. Now, 13 years ago, I asked a similar question to a bunch of colleagues, clients, partners and stakeholders and designers. What makes a good user experience person? We used this term before. I got similar answers. It wasn't the technical skills so much. It wasn't the practice domains. It was a lot of softer interpersonal human relationship skills. And yes, empathy was number 2. But it wasn't just user empathy. It was empathy for stakeholders, developers, other people, something that designers generally, I've found, index low on. We created a poster that kind of translated some of this stuff to physical metaphors, just for a bit of a fun joke and to kind of make it more engaging. A bit tenuous, but it started to bring these to life. But more importantly, we created this little radial chart that people then use in the sessions to map themselves. So I have to give them more time for this because they haven't been asked these sorts of questions before. Most recently, I've been exploring design leadership and the various differences within design leadership. And I've been working with Martina Hodges-Schell at Pivotal Labs. We've been creating an early framework that talks about the different responsibilities of leadership. Now, the interesting thing around these are all intention to solution design and delivery. But they're not necessarily the domain of design leaders themselves. These could be applied to design ops. Many of you probably work in these different areas, have different areas of responsibility. And even beyond design ops itself, the designers themselves can do aspects of these. They're not just a domain of leadership. As part of the sessions, people put their charts up, and everyone's chart is pseudonymous as they're given unique codes, something I learned early on. The patterns are discussed, and people get a sense of the diversity and humility, as well as the skills and the comprehension across the different categories. The shape of the team emerges. Now, with all this, someone always comes back to me and asks about specific techniques and skills. And about 10 years ago, I started creating a spreadsheet for my team. And there were about 70 areas that I captured there. And it probably took about 3 hours to kind of complete and review yourself. It was pretty intense, really valuable, but pretty intense. So I thought, I haven't updated this for a while, and people keep asking for this level of detail. And so I was on a tube, and I had about 30, 40 minutes between a meeting. I started just tapping in all the things that I've heard over the years that designers are expected to do. I very quickly got up to about 250 items, posted the video on Twitter, and someone said, can you open that up as a Google spreadsheet? And I went, oh, OK. Within 2 hours, I had 540 items. Now, there were some duplicates and mixed levels of abstraction. Even so, hundreds of things that designers are expected to be able to do. It's paralyzing. People don't know where to focus. So after mapping and reviewing the patterns, not the list of 500, I would run exercises around people creating their own shape that represents where they are now and where they want to be. They would have to consider aspects of the influence of the business that they're part of, the teams that they're working within, the industry and its pressures on people, and also themselves and what motivates them. And then they would create, with skittles and different charts, they would identify the different categories that were most relevant to them and then score themselves. And then they would take up to 5, only 5, skittles, and allocate them to areas in which they wanted to grow in any of those relevant categories. And if they were able to, they were interested, they thought they could help others, take as many skittles as they want to say, right, I can help someone else in this area. And so we get lots of pretty diagrams, designers getting creative with their skittles. And it's interesting because you're starting to remove yourself, make it less personal. It's bespoke to the individuals, but it's less personal. It feels more fun than a test for a rubric. But what was more interesting is that with the development areas, we got people to write cards. So they would write a mentor card if they thought they could help others, or a mentee card if they wanted to grow. And on the flip side, they would write how they would want to help someone. How could they help someone? Or how would they want to be helped? And the responses were incredibly pragmatic. It wasn't invest in a training course. It wasn't go to a conference on this. Very, very basic things like shadowing, mentoring, reviewing. And you could map these in a session. In this one, for example, there's lots of oranges and only one blue for the visual UI skills. What that meant was there was a lot of people who could offer skills in developing people who were into UI, only one person who wanted to develop in that area. Whereas in strategy, there was almost a flip, where only 2 people could offer it and loads of people who wanted to develop in that area. Now, I understand people like Airtable databases. I've been giving it a go. It's interesting. We can put the data into those and analyze and cross-cut against different levels, titles, roles, etc. Also, you can do some analysis in basic spreadsheets, looking at maybe where the people have rated themselves really, really strong or really, really low. Pull together the development cards into a package of things that you can kind of develop development plans over. So a whistle-stop tour of the process just to kind of help to map where people are, project where they want to be. And it's a very basic process, but it can be really enlightening. So just want to take you through some emerging benefits, building on my initial hypotheses. First of all, I found that they help to explain the differences. They help to frame consistently across an organization around the terms. They help to kind of place individuals against particular projects, against their own development needs and their own skill sets. They help to hire to particular needs and gaps and strengthen and sell the roles better. And they can help people develop themselves and the team, as well as directing their own reflection and focusing on them and seeing how they've been progressing, which could help towards retaining them within the organization and identifying where they can learn and grow. So outside of these emerging benefits, I have 4 key learnings that I've picked up on. First of all, designers rarely spend the time to self-reflect. They find it useful, and using these visual tools helps to engage them better in it. Unfortunately, the tangible skills still dominate, UI skills, not things like IA. But we all know that the softer, more human qualities matter more in this work, and there's an infinite level of development across someone's career. But organizations can help to self-develop. They don't always have to go out to external consultancies and external conferences and external training to do this, only in the areas where they may be lacking. So I believe you could start small with this sort of stuff, start next week if you're able to. Try to find ways to research with the team and reflect regularly, using these visual tools as a framing lenses across different skills and competencies to ultimately help to encourage learning within. Now, just one important last thing, you might be thinking, why did they tell this personal story at the start? Well, I think it's really important for the design ops community. Designers and fellow operators, we're all humans, right? But we're also quite sensitive, passionate, incredible, but fragile humans. We all have a lot of complexity going on in our lives, and we might not be sharing that with the world. We might want to hide things that are kind of upsetting us. So when doing this sort of work, it can turn into therapy, and sometimes we're not trained for that. You have to be treading quite carefully around this. Be careful of going in too deep, but that shouldn't stop you from trying. And maybe, just maybe, we can find a way to do more human solutions for our design teams and maybe less spreadsheets. Thank you.